So, Jamarl, what is your top priority for today?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So, it's one of the stories that we mentioned in the headlines, actually. It was the explosive bombshell from the New York Times that intelligence officials concluded that Russia was paying bounties to Taliban fighters to kill coalition troops in Afghanistan. Now, this story was made much more special with the ever present fixture of the ubiquitous anonymous intelligence official biting and clawing from the shadows. One last indictment that Donald Trump was briefed in March. And we are off to the races. Let's hear Maddow. Let's play the clip.
And if this Times report is correct, this means that U.S. intelligence has concluded that Vladimir Putin is offering bounties for the scalps of American soldiers in Afghanistan. Not only offering money to people who kill Americans, but some of the bounties that Putin has offered have been collected, meaning the Russians at least believe that their offering cash to kill Americans has actually worked to get some Americans killed. The Russians at least believe, if these bounties have been paid out, that the people to whom they have offered this money have successfully gone out and killed American soldiers because of it, and the Russians have therefore paid for that service. And President Trump was told about this in March, and he has done nothing about it. He was given, what did they describe it as, a menu of possible responses. And so far, he has chosen off the menu that he'll have none of it, thank you. He'll do nothing.
He will have none of it, thank you. He will do nothing. The article attacks Russia, so I'm not necessarily shocked that it's printed and accepted without question. My finely baked cynicism even buffers me from being annoyed by the elephant of selective outrage awkwardly crammed into spaces between the words. No, what gets me is the level of ludicrousness. The article doesn't entirely even make sense. The logic of it. It puts you in the mind of the last charge of Assad gassing his people. Now, people like me will raise their hand and say, wait, Assad is like 90% of his territory back. Why would he use chemical weapons and risk giving Western powers an excuse to get more involved in the country? Not to mention, papers reported that the terrorists were backing, that we were backing, had access to chemical weapons, if I am not mistaken, getting supplied through Turkey. To which I'd get called an Assad toady with a snarling response that Assad is a bad guy. He's a bad guy. That's why he'll do it. He's a bad guy. The logic doesn't matter. I firmly understand how grotesque and hideous of a figure Donald Trump is, but please consider what you are being asked to accept without question, the context to which you're being asked to accept it in, and just as important, the Herculean level of hypocrisy necessary for a nation like the United States with the level of mayhem and bloodletting we are responsible for to complain innocent, even if this report is true. Donald Trump has vigorously denied the claim, tweeting, Intel just reported to me that they did not find this report credible and therefore didn't report it to me or the vice president. Possibly another fabricated Russian hoax, maybe by fake news New York Times, wanting to make Republicans look bad. Trump's director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, says the meeting never happened. Russia's foreign ministry dismissed it as unsophisticated plant that clearly illustrates the low intellectual abilities, the propaganda from the United States intelligence, who instead of inventing something more plausible, resorted to conjuring up such nonsense. Even the Taliban representatives derided the report, saying our target killings and assassinations were ongoing years and we did it with our own resources. Which is the logical point, right? The Taliban was fighting to try to repulse a foreign invader. What reason would the Russians have to give them anything to do what they were already doing? The extra incentive wasn't necessary. Also, the Taliban and the United States have been in trilateral peace talks with the Afghan government to find a pathway for the United States to extricate itself from this theater of war. The Taliban explicitly stopped attacking American forces to allow negotiations to proceed in good faith. Again, the objective is to eject the United States. something that the United States also wants to do under Trump. Also, it's not coincidental, is it not coincidental, that every time there's a chance for peace or negotiation that would remove the United States from a theater of war, something drops that attempts to derail the process. Think back to Trump attempts when he tried to pull the United States out of Syria. Remember the backlash. The same thing when Trump tried to make strides towards pulling or getting us closer to peace talks with North Korea. Remember the reports that were dropping that all of the peace talks were basically fluff and nothing was there and so forth, making it difficult for Donald Trump to function in that context. Right now, Trump is in negotiations with Russia over the START treaty, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. He is also negotiating, again, to leave Afghanistan. He's also running in a presidential election, all of which would be negatively impacted by this story, especially if it comes across that Donald Trump didn't do anything about it. We also have no context on the credibility of the story, or for that matter, the political motives involved in regarding of the people who are leaking the story. Last but not least, the United States has some nerve. It was the United States that dropped $20 billion into Operation Cyclone to destabilize Afghanistan. Is that the United States giving $20 billion to incentivize the killing of Russians? What about Syria? We spent billions in weapons and cash to terrorists. Was that the United States paying head choppers to kill Syrians? What about Operation Gladio? Paramilitaries in Western Europe and the false flag operations they would do and the bombings and the killings that would take place. Was that us supplying terrorists to incite fear and whatnot into the population against left-wing governments? And what about the Ukraine? Mike Pompeo bragging. The killing of the Syrians that Mike Pompeo was bragging about was killing Russians in Syria. I'm sorry, that sounds weird, but Mike Pompeo was bragging about killing Russians in Syria. But also, Ukraine. Is this the United States giving weapons in order to kill Russians? I hope you understand what I'm saying here. Do we really have a place to kind of make this argument and make this point? I don't think so. I don't think so. And like I said before, the story in and of itself doesn't entirely make sense. Shane, I know you've heard the story. And I read this and I thought to myself, Russia Gate again.